If I could ask you to take your seats when you get the chance, we'll get started with Professor David Wilkins' keynote. I don't want to like make this overly long, but I'm incredibly grateful to have someone with this kind of overarching view of the legal industry and the legal profession. A lot of the topics that we touched on today have been relevant to your research, and you've come up so many times. I mean, every second call I was on to ask for sponsorship or panelist, someone would ask if you would be there. So thank you so much for taking the time out of what I know is a busy schedule to chat with us today, and I'm excited to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. As I told Robert, I need to apologize in advance because I flew in from Brazil at 2 o'clock this afternoon, and I've already taught one class, and so I'm a little unsure of how well I'll be able to hold my concentration through this. But it's a great pleasure for me to be here because I think the Harvard Association of Law and Business is probably at least one of, if not the most interesting student organization we have here. They do a fantastic job of convening terrific professionals like those in this room. They take the initiative themselves. They receive no support from the school. They do it all on their own initiative. And that's the most that you can hope for from a student organization. And it's not surprising to me that they've picked this topic, which is, I think, one of the more interesting and understudied and increasingly important topics in the world. I was just telling Robert that I first heard about litigation funding maybe 15 years ago from Sylvan Seidel, but only because his grandson was in nursery school with my son. And that's how we started talking about it. So, you remember? So, it's a great pleasure to be with one of the legends in the field. And I told Robert that I'm not an expert in this area, but I do study the legal profession and how it's changing. And so what I thought I would do is talk a little bit about how what I see might impact what you guys are doing. And I hope we'll have some time for question and answer afterwards. So here we go. So you see, that's what I've called it, right? The future of the legal profession in the global age of more for less. That's what I think we're living in now, and why it matters for litigation financing. So I'm a law professor. So therefore, I'm going to give you a little quiz for those of you who haven't been in law school for a while. And I call this the future as Sesame Street. So if those of you may remember from your I think it was a grandson, right? Your grandson, they used to say on Sesame Street, which one of these things is not like the other? So that's the question. I'm going to give you some things, and I'm going to ask you which one of these things is not like the other. So here goes. This one you'll recognize. Backed by Burford's millions, Housefield stakes a claim in Germany. Third-party litigation funder underwrites UK law firm to open a German office to help German companies sue companies violating EU antitrust law. Now, I'll just say, everybody here is saying, oh yeah, ho-hum. Well, I gave this same example in Brazil to a group of 600 lawyers at a conference on what was called New Law, which was about new innovations in law. And when I said this thing, people's mouths dropped open once I explained what it was. So you may take for granted that things like this happen, but this is actually quite revolutionary around the world. And I'd say even a number of American lawyers would find it surprising that a litigation funder is basically backing a UK law firm to open an office in Germany to sue German companies for violations of EU antitrust law. That's at least globalization writ large. All right, that's number one. Number two, I don't know how much of you know about this one. Dxe Technologies Partners. Dxe Technologies is half of Hewlett-Packard when HP split in two. It's basically the hardware part of HP. It's, I don't know, $25 or $30 billion company. The general counsel of DXC partnered with the outsourcing company United Lex, which started out as a kind of back office document review outsourcing company, mostly in India, to jointly manage the legal function, the entire legal function of DXC, including 150 DXC lawyers who are now United Lex employees, and 250 engineers and project managers from DXC who now are dedicated to from United Lex, who are now dedicated to DXC. Okay, maybe you haven't heard of that one. Third, United Lex has done something else. In the last, this was last year, United Lex, an American law firm, AmLaw 200 firm, LeClaire Ryan, have formed something called Ulx Partners, designed to provide law firms with, this is their marketing phrase, market-leading technology, new sources of capital, project and knowledge management, process innovation, and recourse management to deliver maximum value to clients and improve law firm economics. Okay, next one. This is a long one, but it has a lot of stuff in here. As many of you may know, all of the big four accounting firms have become ABS, or alternative business structures, in the UK, which allow them to operate as full multidisciplinary practices, including the practice of law. But in addition, Deloitte launched last year, actually in 2018, Deloitte Legal Management Consulting, which promises to help in-house legal teams, quote, keep pace with business needs and do more with less. PwC launched something called ILC Legal, which is a law firm in the United States, in New York, but it doesn't practice US law. Instead, its goal is to help US clients on international legal matters. Not to be outdone, EY purchased 6 months ago Riverview Law, a top managed legal services provider in the UK. It's probably the #1 managed service firm, initially set up, interestingly enough, by a law firm, DLA Piper. And not to be outdone, the fourth, KPMG just hired the former global managing partner of King & Wood Mallesons, named Stuart Fuller, to run its new legal operations and transformation service unit. KPMG has a legal operation and transformation service unit, which promises to transform the in-house legal function for a more complex future. Okay, following, here's another one. Oracle, the big software giant, just launched a legal practice management system designed to bring its extensive cloud and AI capability to manage the legal function. Okay, here's another one. Axiom Legal Services, which is basically a high-end, flexible working organization which hires my former graduates, you know, superstars like Isabel, although she would never go work there, who maybe they graduated, they go work at Davis Polk for 3 years, then they go to Kirkland & Ellis for 3 more years, but they decide they don't really want to be full-time lawyers because it's too grinding to work in a law firm. So, but they still want to make money from their law degree, so they go work at Axiom. Axiom puts together project teams that they sell to companies like Goldman Sachs, for example, who's trying to figure out some new area that they're not quite sure that they want to hire full-time lawyers in yet, but they don't want to go to Sullivan & Cromwell because it's too expensive. So they hire Axiom, who has lawyers who have worked in this area before, sometimes in law firms, sometimes in-house. They put together a project team. The project team works at the client site under the supervision of the general counsel until the project is done, and then the team goes away. And the lawyers on the team have the option of, and this they loved when I said this in Rio de Janeiro at another meeting I was at for 200 lawyers, they can, quote, go on the beach, which means They can literally go lie on the beach for 2 months or 3 months, or go write the great American novel, or go travel, or climb Mount Everest. And when they're done, they can look in their inbox, and if there's another project they want to take, they can take that project. And here's the catch. As long as they take enough projects during the year, they don't lose their health insurance, which in our country is a big deal, okay? Well, the Axiom is a venture capital-based organization. It's not a law firm. It's got VC money, and they are now spinning basically their main part off, and they're going for an IPO sometime next year or this year. But before then, they entered into a 5-year agreement with Johnson & Johnson in which they were going to provide all of the contract management support for Johnson & Johnson globally, using a combination of proprietary technology and Axiom's agile workforce. Law firms are in the game, but sort of. Clifford Chance launched 2 things. One's called CC Applied Solutions, another's called CC Create. And the whole idea is to be managed independently from the rest of the law firm to bring together the best in tech with the best in legal. One more, Crowd Defend. Crowd Defend is an online platform allowing individuals, organizations, and businesses to solicit crowdfunding for socially motivated legal cases. Okay, what's the test? Sylvan, what are you supposed to tell me? Oh, yes, thank you very much. Yes, that's what you're supposed to tell me. No, which one of these things is not like the other? Yeah, here's the answer. You're almost right, but I'm a law professor, so the answer is they have nothing in common and everything in common, okay? Isn't that what law professors always say? So, first, they're all the same because they're bringing innovation and innovation thinking to the legal profession. They're also all the same because not even those Clifford Chance things are a law firm or a traditional law firm in any sense. But they're all different because they're targeting different parts of the legal services industry using different kinds of tools. They're all likely to face different kinds of regulatory issues and different marketplace challenges, but they're all the same because they raise important opportunities and challenges for your industry. So, why is that? Look, when I teach about the changing legal profession, there's a lot of talk about disruption and legal startups and robot lawyers, okay? And by the way, when I was in Brazil, they had a robot that actually was developed by a Cambridge company that is working right now at MIT to allow people who can't go to MIT courses to participate via robot. So it's actually quite amazing. The robot, if it was in this room, would be sitting there next to Robert and would be participating in the discussion. How? Because the person sitting in Bangalore, India, can manipulate the robot, can speak through the robot can listen, turn its head, walk down the hall. It has all the maps of the MIT classrooms. Okay, robots are a serious thing. But these discussions, I think, are both over and under inclusive, okay, about the state of change in the legal profession. They're under inclusive because lawyers always put lawyers at the center of the universe. So we ask the question, what's happening with the legal profession? How is technology reshaping the legal profession? Well, here's the answer. Technology is reshaping the legal profession the same way technology is reshaping everything, right? Because it turns out the world is being transformed by things like globalization of economic activity and the important movement of that activity from the traditional centers of the global north and west to the new centers of the south and east. Hence why I was in Sao Paulo, Rio, Brasilia, as one of the most interesting places in the world. Or the incredible rise in the speed and sophistication of information technology. In 2017, I began every presentation by holding this up, my iPhone. And I would say, do you realize that the iPhone in 2017 is just 10 years old? Which means before 2007, there was no such thing as a smartphone. Now, even the most senior of us, which, Sylvan, that's you and me, can we imagine our lives without a smartphone? We can't, right? Let alone younger people. You know, I told this to an 18-year-old daughter of a friend of mine in Sao Paulo yesterday, and she looked at me like I had two heads. I said, there used to get off the plane, and there would be a row of payphones, which everybody would have to go to because that's the only way to call people, to tell them that, you know, you arrived safely and please come pick me up, okay? Now imagine what's going to be here 10 years from now that you can't even imagine today, and yet you can't live your life without. That's technology, okay? Last part is a little academic sounding, but I'm an academic, therefore I get paid to talk this way. The blurring together of traditional categories of organization and thought. It's just a fancy way of saying that things that we used to think of as all separate and distinct are now much more intertwined. I don't know, is GM a private company or a public company after the US taxpayers dumped billions of dollars into it in 2009? Let alone Petrobras or Sinopec. Or how about this one? Law and business. We have the Harvard Association of Law and Business. When I was in law school, people would have thought that was a heresy. Law is the completely opposite of business. It's a noble profession, okay? It still is a noble profession, but nobody would say it's the opposite of business anymore, okay? Those things are happening, all right? But here's the other thing. Discussions about robot lawyers and legal startups and everything else and disruptive innovation act as though everything will or should change. But that's not true either, and it's particularly not true in law. So the future of legal work is going to be at the intersection between these important forces of change and these important forces of stability, right? And that future is going to shape the future of litigation finance. So, what's the new economy we're living in? You all know. There's been a huge reduction in what the economists would call information asymmetry between buyers and sellers, just another fancy way of saying that buyers are way more sophisticated about what they want, how they want it, and when they want it, and they can tell the seller that to take things that the seller used to have all nicely bundled together for the benefit of the seller, and to unbundle it along an increasingly global supply chain. The easy way to think about this is think about the way that Sylvan and I used to buy music versus the way in which your grandson and my son buy music. We used to have to go to the record store. Anybody remember that? Even Robert and Isabel remember that. Tower, HNV, right? And you could only buy what was in the record store. And you could only buy it the way the record company wanted to sell it. All nicely put together in a beautiful paying 33 1/3 LP, you know, beautiful cover art, 17 songs, shrink wrapped. And even when we were kids, that thing cost $3.50, which is like $75 in today's money. And we would rush down to the record store to buy that album because what did we really want? What do we really want? The one song they were playing on the radio, okay? Now, to the extent that my son and your grandson buy music at all, pause for anybody in the intellectual property business or who owns shares in a record company, you know, they go to Spotify and they figure out exactly the songs they want to hear in exactly the order they want to play them from whatever artist they want, for whatever purpose they want, you know, like working out at Hemingway or my son and your grandson's favorite, not listening to their parents when they put on the big headphones. And when they get exactly what they want, they click their cool little Galaxy S10 phones together, and guess what's happened to the music business? It's been totally and utterly transformed by this simple phenomenon. I just had Urs Gasser from the Berkman Center in my legal profession class half an hour ago, who made this same point. Second, when you don't know anything, you have to buy stuff on the basis of what you can see. And that stuff is usually the input in a product, like who made it? What's their reputation? How many times have they done it before? How many hours did it take to produce? Sound familiar? But the more you know, the less you care about the input, and the more you care about the output as measured by value to you. So, some of you just went out to dinner. Maybe you didn't know the restaurant scene here so well. What did you do? You went to Yelp or you went to TripAdvisor. You tried to find out, what do people like me, who like what I like, what do they think of this restaurant? Or you buy something, you go to the Amazon reviews, or you go to Angie's List to find out what people thought about the plumber. You're trying to anticipate the outcome. This has been true in the product market and the kind of commoditized services market. It's now coming in the high-end service market. So now, you know what? If you're thinking about a bypass operation, you used to just go to your local hospital, ask to see the cardiologist, they'd send you to the 4th floor, and if they had a medical degree from a medical school you recognized, you felt good. Now, you know what increasingly people do? They go to bestheartdocs.com and they go look up every doctor who does this kind of cardiac surgery. They can find out how many times they've done it, where they're on staff, whether they've ever been sued, what their mortality rate is, what their customer satisfaction ratio is, and most importantly, how much it's going to cost. And you can find, if you go to these websites, that actually there are hospitals. There's a hospital in Bangalore, India, this is a true story, that has as good a success rate for basic kinds of elective heart surgery as Mass General Hospital, Cleveland Clinic, MD Anderson. Only it costs 25% as much. And when you find that, up pops the ad for the travel agent who will book your ticket to Bangalore, India, with, of course, a stop in Agra. Yeah, Agra, because you have to see the Taj Mahal. You can't go all the way to India without seeing the Taj. You know, and then it'll book you into the 5-star hotel that's immediately adjacent to the hospital. You get a personal shopper who will go buy saris and other trinkets for your friends and relatives while you're recovering. And all of it is 50% as expensive as Mass General Hospital, Cleveland Clinic. Glenn Cohen, who runs our Petrie Flom Center here, will tell you medical tourism is booming because people think they can better approximate the outcomes of what they're looking for, not just the input. Finally, we still talk about competition as if it's, you know, company A versus company B, you know, my team versus your team, the Jets versus the Sharks. Remember that one, Sylvan? You don't have to sing tonight. Okay, but that's not really how competition works. I just held up the iPhone. Okay, Apple makes the iPhone, right? Got a few thousand people in Cupertino, California. Only where's the iPhone actually made? Anybody know? You got it, China. By who? Foxconn, which is a Taiwanese company operating in China. That iconic glass screen that we all fell in love with, co-designed by Corning Glassware engineers and Apple engineers. And what does the Apple iPhone still have more of, even than my son's cool Galaxy S12 or whatever it is? Apps. Apple has more apps. And yet, does Apple make apps? Basically, no. Apps are made by bleary 22-year-olds over cold pizza in Central Square, okay? The Apple iPhone is a network. It's a platform. And that's increasingly how the economy works today. So, if all of these things are remaking the economy, why wouldn't they remake the legal profession? Law is a lagging, not a leading indicator of change, meaning it follows bigger trends in the economy, in society. And sure enough, look at us. We have increasingly sophisticated clients who are demanding more transparency from lawyers, who are asking us to take things that we used to have all nicely bundled together, called litigation or transactional work, and saying, no, 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 you should unbundle that into electronic discovery, motion drafting, motion practice, trial preparation, factual investigation, trial argumentation, appellate brief writing or asset valuation, deal terms, due diligence, negotiation, and charge us not for your cost of production, but for the value that we as clients receive. And this is putting huge pressure on the legal profession's traditional business models, like our business model, which is fee for service driven by leverage, okay? Otherwise known as cost plus pricing. We figure out what our cost is, we add a little reasonable profit margin, like say 40%, and then we bill the client. Clients are saying, no, we don't buy anything like that anymore. Or how about our human capital model? Only lawyers can practice law. Well, in that list I just gave you, most of the people weren't lawyers and many of them weren't human beings, okay? Or how about this? Our knowledge management model. If you're young, go to the library. This used to be the library. Did people know that? This used to be Harvard Law School library. There used to be stacks and stuff. When Austin was the only building, this was the library. Or how about this? Ask Sylvan. He's been around a long time. He has gray hair. He knows the answer. But, you know, like last time you wanted to find someplace, you were driving someplace you didn't know. Is that what you did? You sent a junior associate to scout the route and then leave little grains of rice? Or did you ask somebody? Or did you expect that you could go to Google Maps or better yet Waze and just put in the address and something would tell you how to go and where the traffic is? Or how about this, near and dear to our heart? Our educational model, which is roughly speaking, go to a lot of years of formal education to learn how to think like, roughly speaking, an 18th century lawyer. Okay, this is why we are having disruptive innovation in the legal profession, okay? Yeah, I don't probably have to tell you this, you know, Clayton Christensen, he's the guru of disruptive innovation. In this very room in 2013, I held the first conference ever held by any major law school on disruptive innovation in the legal profession, and Christensen from this podium delivered the keynote address. It was really an amazing event. You can actually look at it online on our website. And here's how he defines disruptive innovation. It occurs when existing patterns of work, organization, and hierarchy are radically transformed in a relatively short period of time. He says there are 4 steps. First, new competitors arrive, often having cheap, inferior products that are at a very low level in the marketplace that don't do very much. What do you think the existing people do? Do they quake in their boots and say, oh my God, disruptive innovation is coming, I better change? No, they ignore them. Or they say, good, somebody else is doing all that low-end work. But sometimes those disruptors begin to get better at what they're doing, and their new technologies and new processes begin to catch on, and they begin to move themselves up the value chain. And every once in a while, they get so good you get a flip in which the old way, the established traditional way, just seems old. And the old people don't know how to do the new stuff that everybody wants because they haven't invested in it. Think what happened to Wang Computers and Digital Electronic Company. Anybody but Sylvan and I remember them? No. They were 2 of the 3 biggest computer manufacturers in the world, based right here in Boston. DEC was in the late 1970s was written up by Businessweek magazine as the best managed company in the world. By the mid-1980s, it didn't even exist anymore, and replaced by things that were originally sold. The original personal computers were sold in the toy department. They were novelty gadgets. They had less computing power than your Texas Instrument pocket calculator. Remember that one? Okay. That's what disruptive innovation can do. And why is this happening to law? Because law is the most conservative discipline in the world. I like to say in law, you cannot say anything new until you definitively prove somebody already said it before. That's called precedent, okay? Yeah, when I say this in Brazil and other civil law places, people laugh, and I say, yeah, no, you people can't snicker. You can't say anything new unless Napoleon said it, okay? That means to have a civil code, okay? But doesn't lead to innovative thinking. It's a backward-looking discipline, right? And by the way, law is an incredibly regulated discipline. Only guess who controls the regulation? Us, okay? And how much incentive do we have to change things that might threaten our position in the marketplace? So we control what you have to do to become a lawyer, who gets to be a lawyer, what the standards of practice are, who we could kick out. And we add on a bunch of other very tight rules against competition, like rules against advertising and rules against outside capital, okay? But all these rules are breaking down, starting in the UK. Again, most of you know this. Starting with the 2006 Legal Services Act, you can suddenly have alternative business structures, like the ones that the Big Four are doing, multidisciplinary practice. You can have new forms of outside capital. You can trade your firm on the public stock markets if you want, and there have been firms that have done so. And most of all of this is overseen not by a lawyer, it's overseen by a guy who's a competition law expert, who's not a lawyer, and who therefore has a very different view about how the legal market should operate. And you see other jurisdictions following suit. For those of you, I don't have to tell Isabel, she's been there 6 times, but Singapore is the most interesting legal market in the world right now, where the government is investing tens of millions of dollars to turn Singapore into the legal tech capital of the world. They have something called the Future of Law Initiative Program, or FLIP, and you can go on their website, and it's totally fascinating what they're doing. All of this, of course, is pushing for more innovation in the marketplace. So, what are we seeing? First, and really most importantly, we're seeing people try to figure out how to make money serving the underserved. I tell my students all the time, you want to become, a Zuckerberg? Don't invent some new toy for the corporate sector. Figure out how to get ordinary people access to legal services. This is why LegalZoom is the #1 legal brand in the United States. And as it moves beyond regulatory restrictions, it's going to become more and more important around the world. We're seeing people using AI and other technology to streamline or replace basic legal tasks, like legal research, like contract reading, documentation, all of that. We're seeing the application of data analytics, pattern recognition, process management, predictive analytics. And we're seeing a bunch of matching networks in which, think Uber, where we're matching excess capacity in one part of the system with people who have needs in the other. All of these things are attracting significant venture capital funding from ordinary private equity firms, but all of them are going to be pushed by you, the people in this room, because third-party litigation funders are looking for every advantage that they possibly can to figure out how to pick winners and losers. That is your business. And therefore, you are going to push legal tech the way quant traders pushed fintech. But they're also pushing substitutes, okay? Other ways people can drive efficiency and get capital into the legal system. And general counsels, who are the most important people in the corporate part of the system, are driven to experiment with all of these kinds of ideas because they themselves are being asked to solve increasingly complex problems. So I teach a lot of general counsels. I teach a course called Leadership in Corporate Counsel. I'm going to have 60 or 50 general counsels here probably in another 4 or 5 weeks. I do a lot of speaking to general counsels, and I always ask them, what keeps you up at night? Okay? And they say things you would predict. Cybersecurity, data privacy, anti-bribery and corruption, safety and catastrophic risk, a whole bunch of new or newly important threats. But they're also worried about what I call the massification of existing problems. So I just came back from Brazil, where there are 100 million lawsuits in the system. Like if you're a big bank in Brazil, you literally have 1 million lawsuits pending against you at any time. And you can't figure out, you don't even know where they are or when they are because their process is so bad. Or take the number of contracts that have to be changed by a big bank after AFID, right? Or think about compliance or internal systems. These are problems that were always there, but now they're huge because the entities are huge and global. And what keeps up every general counsel is that they're under tremendous cost pressure to justify the legal department's expense. Legal departments are a cost center. Litigation, transactional work, all that stuff is cost to the company. So the general counsels are being asked to justify that cost by coming up with measures about return on investment, about KPIs, and about how to drive improvement and create value. All of this is in an environment in which we have a huge amount of regulatory overload, huge new laws coming from all sorts of jurisdictions. You don't even know if you're subject to it until you are subject to it. I've been asking general counsels, like in Brazil, are you subject to GDPR? They say, I hope not, okay? But, you know, you don't know, because maybe you have some European subsidiary or European supplier, and plus Brazil just passed a privacy law. U.S. is probably going to pass some kind of privacy law, right? And yet law is only a small part, not an unimportant part, but a small part of the problem. If you have a data privacy problem, it's mostly an engineering problem. Or maybe it's a customer relations problem, you know, or maybe it's an information problem. It's a lot of different kinds of problems in which law is a piece, but only a piece. I often say to lawyers, your clients don't have legal problems. They don't. They have problems, of which they would like to take the legal part and reduce it to as small a part as possible so they could concentrate on the part of the problem they actually care about, which is the business part, or the human capital part, or the political part, or whatever, okay? And therefore, if you're a general counsel, your job is to aggregate huge amounts of data and huge amounts of expertise across a very wide platform of knowledge to try to help your organization navigate increasingly complex problems. But it's even more complicated than that. Because remember I said, not everything will or should change. So, yes, there are robots, but for the foreseeable future, law is a human capital business, which means we have what we like to call elevator assets. If you're in a law firm, they come into your elevator at one financial place or something, they go up to the 75th floor with panoramic views of Boston Harbor and the clock tower and all that. They can see the planes take off at Logan. They work for a mere, I don't know, 15, 16 hours, and then they take the elevator down at night, and you just hope and pray that they get back in the elevator tomorrow morning and go up. because without them, you don't have a business. In fact, we tell law firms, why do you lock your doors at night? Your assets are walking around the streets, okay? That, for the foreseeable future, is the reality. I'm not saying no legal jobs are going to go away because of automation and artificial intelligence, but nobody thinks that those technologies are anywhere near enough to replace people, lawyers in particular, particularly lawyers at the higher end, which means you got to figure out how to recruit them, how to develop them, how to retain them, and how to manage them, okay? Second, clients still want relationships with their lawyers. So I was reading an article in preparation for this about, what was the firm that got bought by Burford, Gordon, the guy, Harvard Law School's guy, what's it called? Yeah, Gretchen Keller. And it was all about how they were going to start marketing to companies and whatnot. And they said, but you know, we're having trouble breaking through because the general counsel keeps wanting to talk to the lawyer. Well, that's because if you're in trouble, you want a human being who you're going to be able to talk to, and you want that human being to know something about your business. So we've seen increasing convergence in which general counsels are using fewer and fewer firms on the hope that they will understand their business better. Shell just went from something like 250 law firms to 6. They don't do everything, but they do a huge amount of Shell's work, right? And that's reinforcing a kind of partnering model, which is very much a relationship model, which is very much an older model between the attorney and client. It's not a spot contracting model, as some people like to say. And here's the most thing. Tradition and stability are still important for law. Let's put it this way. If we're not going to deregulate the taxi cab market totally, okay, we are certainly not going to deregulate the legal market, because law is fundamentally about goods that are critical to society. And we cannot have, you know, rule of law 2.0, and then, oops, there was a little glitch, here's a patch, and then we have rule of law 2.1. I was just in Brazil, okay, in which 3 presidents in a row have been indicted or gone to jail. If that had happened 20 years ago, there would be tanks in the streets. But they're not, because they have a strong judiciary and a strong set of prosecutors who are holding the government officials accountable. That means that the rule of law demands continuity. It demands a certain level of respect for tradition and history. That's what it means to have a constitution. So that's not going to change. And both people and institutions make long-term investments in order to become lawyers. You want somebody as smart as Robert to go to law school? You're going to tell him to do 4 years of college and 3 years of law school and get maybe, who knows, $250,000, $300,000 in debt? And then you're going to tell him, oh, by the way, we decided your job is replaced by a robot? If you want smart people, you're going to have to figure out how to give them some pathway in which their investment will be rewarded. Okay? And that means every part of the legal ecosystem, including you guys, are going to have to understand that you are partly dependent on these old rules. For example, where do you get your judgment about which cases to invest in? Mostly by hiring a bunch of smart lawyers. And even if you're training some AI machine or machine learning, it's being trained by smart lawyers, right? Your business is parasitic in, you know, not in a mean way, but on the existence of people making the kinds of investments that have to continue to happen for your business to continue. So, you guys talk a lot about access to justice, and I think that's an important conversation to have. But it's important that actually you can demonstrate that litigation funding is actually making access to justice for people who can't afford it, as opposed to for companies who don't want to pay the money and are looking for a way to hedge their risk, or for class action lawyers who could afford to defray the litigation but are looking for other ways to defray risk. I'm not saying defraying risk is a bad thing, but access to justice is critical to the legitimacy of the whole system. And if you're going to be a part of the system, you're going to have a responsibility for that. And with respect to the private business, you're going to have to show the general counsels that you can help them solve their problems, not just deliver a cheaper way of doing something that they actually wish they didn't have to do anyway, which is to be involved in the litigation system. That is, you've got to be a piece of an overall solution, okay? And that's partly because there's a whole new breed of innovation professionals whose job it is increasingly to look closely at what you're doing and what all those other pieces of the ecosystem that I talked about at the beginning are doing. How many people here know what clock is? Okay, all the students. No one else. You better find out. Clock is not what you're looking at to say, when is this guy going to stop talking? CLOC is the Corporate Legal Operations Consortium, okay? It started out 3 years ago, now 3.5 years ago, with 10 people sitting around a table, convened by Mario Carroll, who's the head of legal operations at Google. Mario Carroll's job is to make the Google legal department more efficient, both internally and externally. She said, I wonder who else has this job. It was like 10 people. This year, they're going to have 3,000 people, it should say 2019, 3,000 people are going to convene in Las Vegas, all of whom have this job. And they have chapters in London, Hong Kong, Sydney, Johannesburg. Singapore is just about to open. Maybe Isabel will tell me it's already open, okay? And law firms are reacting in part to the creation of this new job by giving people jobs like Chief Innovation Officer. And these people are all charged with driving innovation in the legal function. In other words, they're going to be either your partners or your bosses, okay? Because they are the ones increasingly who are going to decide what gets bought and what doesn't. Mario Carroll's office is right next to the general counsel of Google. And he is looking to her to help figure out how to drive efficiency in the legal function. We know this is happening, but it's brand new and we know almost nothing about it. So I'm going to show you just a little data. We've got a big research project on these professionals. We're doing 3 things. We're surveying them. We are convening them. We've convened groups of 80 innovation professionals 3 different times, half from law firms, half from companies, once at Google, once in New York. The next one will be here at Harvard Law School in a few months. And we're asking them 2 questions. What's the career path in innovation? What does it mean to be an innovation professional in a legal organization, particularly if you're not a lawyer? And here's the most important one. What are the metrics of success? What are we looking at to decide whether the investment is worthwhile? And it's not just cost, it's quality. And it's not just the quality of new innovations, it's the quality of existing practices against which they are measured, okay? We're running a pilot project in which we're working with IDEO, which is one of the world's leading design thinking firms. We're working with Fidelity. There's tremendous interest in particularly the client general counsel community about this. So if you don't know it, you should know it, okay? You could keep up with it. We have a digital magazine called The Practice, which we'd love to have you subscribe to, where we're going to write about what we found. And although our research is ongoing, I'm just going to show you a little snippet. We asked companies, the people who work in companies, and we asked the people who work in law firms, what are you charged with? What is it that you're trying to do for your company? What is it, or your law firm? What is it, the thing you're supposed to be looking at? This is called a block grant. I'll show you how it works. The larger the square, you can see this little thing, right? the more people said they were charged with it. Look at law firms. The biggest thing they're looking at is AI and machine learning. But look at companies. They're looking at AI and machine learning, but look at what they care about more. Knowledge management, project management, law firm relationships, predictive analytics. In other words, law firms like to go out and buy shiny new toys and present them to their clients and say, look what we bought for you. And the clients say, you know what we want? We want you to do your jobs better. And we want you to manage the litigation better. We want you to manage your transactional work better. There's a big disconnect. I think there's an opportunity for you guys here to help with that disconnect. So, what's the legal ecosystem? Yes, we have law firms, we have legal departments, but we now have a huge amount of alternatives, right? Global multidisciplinary professional service firms, who we still foolishly call the accounting firms. These people are your competitors because guess what? They have huge pools of capital. They don't need your money, okay? They can cross-subsidize. They have global reach, okay? You've got tech companies, startup and established, like Oracle. You've got legal talent platforms. So in other words, another way that a company can substitute for what you do is to hire outsourced lawyers, like at Axiom. You've got top legal process outsourcers like United Lex saying, we're going to manage jointly the legal function like an outsourced function. That's going to be a whole different relationship with legal litigation funding than you're having right now, either with law firms or general counsels. And you got a bunch of do-it-yourself platforms. And of course, there's you. And all of this is being pressed to move from a fee-for-service business to what I call an integrated solutions business. An integrated solutions business starts from the client's point of view, understands what the client's pain points are, and designs a solution not for the legal problem, but for the entire problem that the client can ultimately bake into their own practices. This is what the big four are selling at the intersection of technology, strategy, project management. And yes, they don't do litigation, but they manage it. So that Deloitte legal management consulting, you better believe they're going to the general counsels and say, don't let the law firms make these decisions, and don't let them decide whether they're going to lay off some of the risk on a litigation funder. You should be in charge of it, and we know how to do that. Okay? Increasingly sophisticated general counsels are going to understand the value of trying to control the whole legal system. So, PwC just did a study in which they said collaborative innovation outpaces traditional R&D by a huge amount. What does that mean? That means companies increasingly are going to try to get organizations, all their providers, to work across organizational boundaries to provide value. That's bad for law firms because law firms don't play well with others, okay? But it's also not great for you, at least so far, because your industry has been a secretive, proprietary industry. And the pressure is against that, towards more open source or more understanding of how things work, okay? All right, where do we go from here? I don't know. If I was know, I'd be as smart as Sylvan, okay? It means that we need to rethink how we think the legal ecosystem, including law's role as a public profession, which cannot either be eliminated or simply whitewashed, okay? Because the legitimacy of every part of the legal system depends on this, okay? Which is why events like this are so important. What we could do is first support organizations like this, which I think are fantastic. But I hope that we also, meaning we, the Center on the Legal Profession, and others, can engage in empirical research about what's really happening out there in the market and what its implications are. And if that sounds like a shameless plug for me and my center, it is. Thank you very much. All right, guys, it's been a long day. If anybody has any quick questions, I may not last very long, but Isabel, okay? Has everybody met Isabel Yushi Yang? She's a brilliant graduate of ours just a couple of years ago, has a very interesting startup in the arbitration space.
Last year, not a couple of years ago.
Last year. I'm sorry, I'm making you older than you, okay.
So, that's precisely my point. I graduated from this law school, started legal tech, and my company is represented by very expensive lawyers.
Yes.
And I'm selling to lawyers in the same time as well as litigation funders. So is this being recorded? Oh, shit. Okay. All right.
Yeah. But you love those law firms.
You're very diplomatic. So where's the slide that says, is the billable hour model going to last?
Well, there is no such slide. I mean, as I told you, there is definitely...
Because from my vantage point, that is the number one obstacle to all of this innovation. All the trends and patterns you identify, I completely on board. But, you know, things happen very slowly in the legal industry. I think primarily number one obstacle is the billable hour
Well, that's what
model.
I said, that there's pressure on the fee-for-service model. But here's the point, Isabel. The billable hour is never going to go away until the general counsel can explain when they lose the lawsuit or the deal doesn't close why they didn't hire Wachtell or Paul Weiss or Cravath, right? And you can only do that if you have some objective measures of outputs and quality, okay? The billable hour, of course, is not really the billable hour. Almost everybody is operating on some kind of flat fee, fixed fee, negotiated fee. But underneath it all is the billable hour. And the people who are keeping it alive are the clients. Because if the clients wanted to kill the billable hour, they could have killed it. People have been talking about killing the billable hour since I was in law school. And they don't kill it because people get nervous about how else are they going to measure whether they're getting the effort that they want, okay? Now, this is why I think, you know Ron Dolan, this is why this project around objective quality metrics is so important. Because if we have metrics, we don't need to have the approximation of that metric by inputs. Now, I'll just say one other thing. Even if you got rid of the billable hour totally for billing clients, you'd still have it being used as measuring the work of associates. And until somebody has a better way of figuring out whether somebody's actually delivering quality. So both things have to be attacked. But now that you're a client, you should just tell your law firms, if you're prepared to do it, that you do not want them to bill you by the hour, that you want to agree on some metrics of value to begin with, and that you will pay them for that value with a premium if it's delivered in a certain amount of time and a certain standard, and at a cost which could go to zero if it's not. But I bet you when you think about how to do that, that's not easy to do. Sylvan, I picked on you the whole time. I have to let you ask a question.
First of all, David, thank you. You remind me why I could never take your course. You're so far above us. I have this question.
Okay.
This is a brilliant presentation. This question, though. In England, as you know, as you cited, the financiers can invest in law firms. They can't in the U.S. How much do you think that's going to influence the practice of law in the UK now, but ultimately it's going to happen in the US as well?
So I agree it is going to happen. I think, so the US is a complicated story, mostly because there is no single jurisdiction. In other words, in the UK, The government, once Parliament passed the UK Legal Services Act, it could mandate everything for all lawyers. Here we have 50 state bars plus the District of Columbia. Having said that, here's when I think things will change. You may know, actually you probably follow this closely enough to know, the question of multidisciplinary practice is going to be the first to change. And in fact, there was already a proposal for the Ethics 2020 that went all the way up until the House of Delegates to allow multidisciplinary practice. Yes, there'll be some restrictions, just like the audit firm. You know, the Big Four can't sell legal firms, legal services to their audit clients. We used to think that was a restriction until we realized even PwC, the biggest one, only audits 25% or 30% of all the clients, and then that just left them with 70% of all the companies they could sell to, which turned out to be no restriction at all. So multidisciplinary practice is going to happen first. But some forms of outside capital will happen. It'll have restrictions. There are restrictions in the UK, but it'll happen. And when that will happen is when the first really important UK law firm takes outside money. And, you know, they're not going to go public. Clifford Chance isn't going to go public. But Allen and Overy or Clifford Chance might, let's take Allen and Overy since they just merged with O'Melveny and Myers. If Allen and Overy takes a $100 million private placement from Blackstone in return for, I don't know, 10% of the revenue of certain kinds of cases in certain places, then when, and by the way, now, even though it's technically not supposed to go to its U.S. subsidiary, it's made Allen and Overy jump 3 places in the Global 100, you better believe that U.S. law firms will press to do the same thing. Because the biggest constraint on law firms is their inability to make real capital investment. And I think at some point that is going to put pressure in the system to change. But I'll tell you what you can do to help it, Sylvan. You can actually make litigation financing come out of the shadows. You can make your commitments to access to justice be more than just a slogan. You can do pro bono litigation funding. You can actually, you know, and I'm not talking funding, you know, medical device class actions, because guess what? Those lawyers are perfectly capable of bringing themselves. You know, there's a real potential to actually fund cases for ordinary individuals and small businesses that wouldn't be able to do it. You could run pro bono the same way that law firms do pro bono, which saved law firms from a lot of the scorn, including from my students, that came from them thinking that they were only there to serve the powerful and not the powerless. Okay, that's enough lecture for you. All right, Robert, I got to go home.
I understand. And thank you so much. We're truly lucky to have you, and we're lucky to have you at the law school, and we're lucky to have you here. So
thank you very much.
Thank
you guys.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.